Hey y'all, it's your boy here, Text Ranger, and I'm here to introduce y'all to Assassination Classroom Discussion Part 2. Enjoy!
And I tried really hard not to judge the show by what I wanted it to be. I really tried to meet the show on its own terms. So some of the stuff where it's like, yeah, the quick character development, the funny, quirky teacher, it's a slice of life, day in the life show. It's not really about assassinating, which is like the first thing I can imagine someone telling me when I say I don't like the show. They're like, it's not about the assassination. I'm like, yes, obviously, I know
But
that.
it was supposed
but
to.
But even on its own terms, it doesn't tell me anything. Like, I still don't know what I'm supposed to get out of the show. Study hard, have good teachers, some teachers care about you, and society will try to break you down, but you should know that's not gonna happen. That whole like last part too, where they're just like, you should have seen it downhill when Kurosama was just like, oh, we'll figure something out, okay. And I was like, that sounds very casual to what's happening. And then it was like, yep, we didn't really poison you that much. And I'm like, this is dumb. This is stupid.
Can I just like very quickly go on like a quick tangent? Like, we have had not one, not two, but 3 sets of police sirens during this podcast episode. And like, granted, Silver and I live in Minneapolis, and we live pretty damn close to like the Target and the Cub Foods that were like that people like, went out and like looted and attacked and all that shit. And we live pretty damn close to where George Floyd, R.I.P. big homie, was murdered. But like, can I just I mean, it's not even a but. And can I just say, like, fuck the police. Like, what? I'm so
now, aren't you glad I started off this podcast with that? It all comes together.
Oh my god. Okay, so with that said, I'm gonna reel us back in.
I'm leaving that in when I add it.
Yeah. Leave it in. It was almost like prophetic, like the episode where you had like 3 police sirens coming in. Anyways, I hear a fourth one.
Hey, it just proves at the end of the day we're all real people, and no matter how much I hate this show or Silver likes the show and Tropical Robot kind of dislikes the show, and then Texas Ranger thinks, it's fine, it's okay, we're all still real people who exist in the world.
I do believe that part 2 will not answer all of your critiques, but it will, like, I think you'll be able to say, like, I'm probably never going to watch this again, but I enjoyed what part 2, like, if you just think about it in separate parts, just forget part 1. Just remember korosensei and start fresh in part 2.
It's like when you watch The Office.
So much better.
Okay.
Get through first season.
Okay.
Okay. You know what I fear? Part 2 being good is just going to make me hate part 1 even more. Because then I'll just be like, why couldn't we have this from the beginning?
Like, the biggest part that part 2 does right compared to part 1, it starts to find its identity and it starts to stick with that a little bit better.
Oh, thank the Lord.
Yeah.
We get some shooters.
Okay. So
notice
with
that I
that
didn't say it
said,
does it perfectly because it's still struggling with it.
Okay.
So with that said, I think I'll move us into some of the more, I mean, to be honest, like, we kind of talked about a lot of the thematic stuff, but like, there's still a couple more things to explore that I think are particularly interesting. Like, there's 2 things that immediately come to my mind. Number one is the kind of like the role of like power in like the show, and like different types of power in the show, and I'm actually interested to see how this is gonna unfold over the course of the rest of the show. And I think of power here primarily as like influence, if that makes sense, like something that like influences like people's behaviors, people's like thinking, people's like actions, et cetera. Power as like something that forms like a human person to be who they are. And this kind of power is something that is often in institutions and also like embodied through like different kinds of individuals. And so in this instance, I'm thinking, I mean, I thought one of the most, like, philosophically speaking, one of the most interesting things about the show was just kind of like the dynamic between like the mode of power demonstrated by the whatever Tawaka, I think that's his name is, like when he shows up, and like the contrast of that with the like mode of power exemplified by like the principal and like the school. And so, or like the modes of power, because I think we can talk about two different ones as applies to the school. But anyways, with the kind of like Tawaka, it's like he's just kind of like, he's a patriarch, you know what I mean? Like he's like the embodiment of like the patria potestas, like this like Roman doctrine that was like the patriarch is someone who has like the legal right to literally kill his children and like rape his wife. Like that was like a thing in like Roman law. And it's like, I mean, it's an interesting concept like to kind of tease out historically. But the point is with this guy, it's like he's like very much like, you know, an embodiment of like patriarchal power. Like he's like, I am like the doting father, that is half of me. And then like, but like the like love is like really like manipulative. There's this like insidious like you know, set of beliefs like connected to it, and like set of like expected outcomes. And then there's like this like hyper violent like side of him, which is like when he's like training the kids, he's like, oh, I'm so nice, blah, blah, and he comes in to take like the place of like the other teacher. I don't remember, maybe somebody can clarify why that happens, but point is I wasn't really,
I don't know either.
Yeah, whatever.
They just kind of, they just say, oh, the Japanese Defense Forces wants to speed this up, so I'm here.
In any case, like this guy, you know, he is like, you know, violently abusive towards the kids. And then like Nagisa ends up like embarrassing him, which is like an interesting dynamic too, because it's like this guy who like kind of built his whole like self-image around like it was weird. He's like someone who was like, he's like an example of someone who has like traumas and then like enacts their like traumas as like, or like someone who like takes like harm and like conflates it with abuse, and then uses that like conflation of like harm with abuse to like then justify like being like horribly oppressive and like playing out his like, you know, kind of like this conflict like onto like other people, and like doing it in like a way that is like, you know, like establishing himself as like a supremacist basically, in the sense that he's like he is like supreme like over people, and like his like whole self-identity is like built around domination. And then he gets embarrassed, and so his whole self-image comes like crumbling down, and that's kind of like the setup for like the last arc, where he's like just like a crazy person, because he's actually the villain in the last arc. He's like a crazy person, and you know, he's just can only like crave like revenge for what happened. That's like the only thing that's like, because he's like, maybe that'll help like the guilt and like the shame all go away, which is like, nah brother, that's not how shit works. But anyways, then like in contrast to that, like even like the principal ends up like kicking him out of the school grounds, because the principal is like no, it's not enough to be just a tyrant, like that's misguided. And here's what is interesting to me, because like the principal's like view and like the way that power functions and like the institution of the school is very interesting, because like on the one hand, and folks who are like knowledgeable on like you know, Foucault would like know exactly where I'm coming from and have been coming from in this analysis. But it's like, you know, if you think of it in terms of like Foucaultian like analyses of power, it's like disciplinary power, which is very much like, you know, it's like premised on like surveillance, and it's like premised on like regimentation, and like the outcome of it is to like take people and to shape them into like docile bodies, that meaning like just like it's like bodies that can be like improved upon by like power as power sees fit. And so like that's like, you know, like it's the kind of power we see in like schools, you know, with like the way that space is configured, and in prisons. And like there's this like element of like always being watched, and there's this like element of like there's like a norm, and it's like if you're below the norm, there's something like if you're abnormal, that's like something terribly wrong with you, and so you always have to conform to the norm. And so that's like kind of that model of like power that's like exemplified by like the school and like the principal. And then there's also this kind of like inbuilt like, I don't know, it's like it's an ism of sorts. It's like I think it's a classism, to be honest with you. That's how I kind of think of it. But it's like, you know, like it's interesting because like Foucault's like way of thinking about it is like very much like there's like a like he theorizes like his like kind of like underdeveloped like third notion is like biopolitics, and it's like politics of like the population. And it's like you have a population that you're trying to like the life of that population, you're trying to like improve the quality of like the life of that population. But like part of what that's premised on is like this distinction between like those who, and like Foucault talks about it in terms of like state racism, and it's like this distinction between like, you know, those good members of society and like those members like, or those like threats, like those internal threats within society and those external threats to society. And so like, I don't know, you think of like the kids, and like the kids like in the N class are like, oh, they are like marginalized, like their whole purpose is to exist as like both like an ever-present like, you know, ever looming like specter of like what like the other kids could like, you know, like become, which is like, you know, unmeritable, right? Unless if we want to think of it in terms of like meritocracy, right? And also like so they exist as that, and then they're also supposed to be this like permanent like underclass, and like the school, like the N class is not supposed to like overtake people who are not in the N class, at least not structurally. Like individuals from the N class can go back to being a part of like this elite school, but like not the class as a whole. Like the class as a whole cannot like demonstrate that like, you know, it's like actually like that its foundation isn't actually grounded in reality, because that like would completely undermine like the way that power is configured in like the setting of the school. And I don't know if people have thoughts on that. I know that was a fairly long tirade, and we can kind of unpack more about like the kind of like meritocracy aspect and like how it connects to like that school versus school in our like real life. But like, I guess I'll open it up a little bit to folks before I move to that.
Silver, since you're the ass class expert, question, and other people could answer too. I'm just not just asking Silver. To get into E class, you just have to have consistent like bad grades, or you have to be like a bad person. Like, for example, Karma clearly is a smart, has good grades, but because he beats up people and didn't show up for school, he got suspended. He got sent to E class, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, if you have bad grades, or if you fall below, like they set an exact number. I just can't remember off the top of my head.
So
I think if you're in like the bottom like quarter or something like that, it was a weird like number. And also, if you're a delinquent, yeah, you get put in E class.
Okay, so there are obvious characters that, you know, they're representative of, like, those that are being outcasted from whatever structure of society we have. But then, like, again, when I go back to this idea that most of these characters are just kind of filler, do all these characters just are bad students? Like, the characters who aren't, like, obvious delinquents or whatever, are they bad students? Like, the girl, for example, who ended up being number one in, I think, English or whatever, who had, like, blonde hair. Like, okay, did she just have terrible grades for the longest time and then was just like, boom, smart now because korosensei taught her? I guess that's just a question. That might be just a nitpicky thing. I don't know. That was weird.
Oh, are you talking about the like students that like did really well in certain subjects?
Yeah, I guess, because I'm confused on the idea that all these students are so bad at school, because if I don't feel this might just be me critiquing the idea that they just didn't play up this angle that E class really is the dredges of society, where it's like, yeah, some of them obviously are not smart, and then some of them obviously have like what the structure of the school would consider atypical personality issues, like obviously bullies or people like Karma, or even Nagi-sa, who just, I don't know, he looked meanly at some kids, and that's not good. So, I don't know. That was weird. But going back to Tropical's idea of, like, the structure of power, I think, I don't know, metaphorically looking at the show, I just felt it was just, like, a commentary on sort of the idea of, like, building a system that succeeds for the majority of people can still leave a few outcasts that might be necessary for the city to function, for the structure to function. And that like is his own commentary on like, yeah, even though it's successful for like 75% of people, if it leaves 25% of people feeling like absolute garbage, is it worth it? No, I think most of us can probably say like, nah, they don't deserve to be treated like as comically as they're treated like dirt. But even then, it kind of undermines itself, because korosensei then comes in working within the system itself and builds them up. And it's not like they discover a new system per se, like to better themselves. They kind of just work within the system. It's sort of like the system just declared them like, oh, this is your place, and then they're just like, oh, we're just gonna then follow the rules and just show you it's not. And it's like, oh, so it's not their place, but it's gonna be someone's place. So if it's not them, then it's gonna be someone else. So it doesn't really bring anything down, I guess, unless the idea is once you've been labeled this, you can never leave. If that's the route they're trying to go, I can understand. Like, for example, let's just take Nagisa. Let's say Nagisa does really well in his exams and then gets pushed up to D class, and then someone gets pushed down to E class. Is that the system breaking, or is that just the system operating as designed? You know? Mm-hmm. And so the idea of like, oh, if E class just had a good teacher, then all of E class could rise up above their station. Wouldn't that just push other people down?
That's facts. Yeah. So it's like in theory, it's
yeah,
really not.
But at least in the way that I like the show is trying to put it. So like basically like the way they had it set up. I mean, just looking at it from like a differences in resources in the main building and their building. Basically, the way they have it set up, their system is if you get into E class, like that's it. Yeah, in theory, you can get out of it if you get good enough grades. But the way they had it set up, like realistically, that wasn't gonna happen.
Yeah, right. I guess that's what they were trying to have.
Yeah, but like, ultimately, and this is, I think, what Base is getting at, and thank you, Base, for pointing this out, because I actually hadn't connected this dot yet. It's like, if you're not aiming to change the power structure, you're ultimately just putting people, even at the most like radical version of it, which is like you elevate like the entire class of people above into like a different rung or whatever. Like ultimately, like you just end up with like a different group of people at like the top of the pyramid and another group of people at the bottom of the pyramid. And so in that sense, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like it's not, you know, it tries to like present itself, I guess, as like radically destabilizing as a system, but like it's not radically destabilizing the system. It's not in any way, shape, or form even attempting to like it's like implicitly addressing the system, but it's not explicitly aiming to like overthrow the system, which is like an interesting point to bring up. And guess what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna now bring us to talking about real life. Let's talk about real life, guys. A lot of people who listen to this podcast, I think a lot of people in general would look at this system and say, oh, this is unjust. This is like not okay. Like ultimately, guys, guess what? This is just like a in-your-face version of like the current education system, at least in the United States. I don't know how things look in Japan. I think Silver knows a little bit more about this. But any country that kind of has a system, like an educational system that's set up in terms of that whose like primary like ideological device is like measuring merit, like quantifying like merit, is this. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a version of this. Like the people, like I guess it's like the difference is like instead of there being like a permanent undercast, like the people at the very bottom are kind of like kicked out. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just expelled. But like ultimately, like the same like kind of like ideological figure of like the unmeritable like individual, like that is still like whether you're talking about you know, elementary school, middle school, high school is when it becomes very real, and then college, like this is the current, like this is a different like way, a more in-your-face way of like expressing like the current dynamics built into like the educational system, and certainly in the US and in many other countries. And so it's just, you know, and like to be frank with you, this case study is like one where it's like, oh, this is within an elite school, so like kids who are like the undercast within an elite school, in comparison, which is like it's there in the show, it's not thematized really, not in like a meaningful way, it's dismissed, but like in comparison to like the vast majority of people in the world, you're pretty damn well off if you are the socially marginalized group within the elite. You're pretty damn well off. And so it's just, you know, one of those things where it's like, I don't know if what comments folks have on this, but like it's one of those things where it's like this is just like the myth of meritocracy. You take that, and instead of kind of having like, you take that ideology and elevate it to like the level of like institutional design. rather than just like ideological. But like again, it's like it is a thing, but you kind of make it like you height. It's not a difference in kind, it's a difference in degree.
And like, just so I got a lot of thoughts on that, especially like this is like my specialty. So going earlier to like what you said, Base, first saying like Nagisa raising up in the system, does that break anything? And as you said earlier, as you said also, Tropical, no, like not at all. That's the system still working perfectly fine. I think like Class E had one purpose, and that purpose is to have other classes say, at least I'm not in that class. It doesn't matter if you get out, doesn't matter if you stay in. It just says there is a bottom. This is literally saying there's losers, so we can say that we're winners. And that's like the biggest philosophical concept I can see coming from that class. And like there's other animes, like especially if they deal with like classroom animes when it gets to that. There's one called Classroom of the Elite that like dips into this type of idea that's like, oh, at least I'm not in the bottom class, and that's the only purpose. Whether it's good or not, whether they're thriving, it kind of doesn't matter because it's not your point to thrive in that class. Mm-hmm. And if you do, then that's cool. I'm glad you did. Good job. And then they give you a medal to say that, look, anybody can survive or something like that. And like that points to real life. Like you see all these, like if you're the people are at the bottom or people like really living bad, and then if anyone makes it, they're like paraded. They're like, oh yes, look, anybody can make it. This shows that meritocracy exists. This shows this and that, ignoring everything that's like literally made in place to not have them make it, and then just to like pat yourself on the back. And then also another key concept like this gets into as y'all were talking about, saying that like delinquents, bad kids, I'm gonna put quotations around that, are put in that class. And this is a big concept that many people debate all the time. Is it the teacher that's bad, or is it the students that's bad? Like, which one is the deciding factor in somebody's success? And I know this show is going to route to say, hey, with any good teacher, then the student will do fine regardless, and that's the fault of the administration on top. And then you go in other places, like in real life, and this is like a real big discussion. Like, I'm about to be part of a campus that says that it's the teacher's fault if the student's not doing good. We need to make sure we have only great teachers, and we'll make sure to keep that up. Versus there's institutions that say, oh, it's the student's fault that they didn't do good. And it's like a different dynamic of where you put the responsibility and power. And like in honesty, it's like a both. Because like this show could have very well been very different if it weren't kids that like as you said, like they're at the bottom of the elite. So they have definitely a lot of different things going for them to keep them motivated and going good, to have a great teacher and then be like, oh yeah, we're about to blow up now. Like that's might have been the only thing they needed. But but like it could have easily been the other case if we did not have the bottom, not the bottom of the elite, like bottom of all types of other bottom, and there was many more systematic things that were oppressing these students. It's gonna take more than just a good teacher to come in and save the day. More than and literally like korosensei ain't even a teacher. Like this man is a whole, like, he can run at Mach 20. Like this is a super teacher. So that's not even fair. Like that's a whole nother like concept of like, oh, what's too much of a super teacher? Like, does every teacher need to be a super teacher? And then if that's the case, how are we treating teachers, and what do we need for teachers to do? Like, we need to start encompassing a teacher to be able to do everything, literally everything. And just getting into this debate, I'll say like this is the most I'll say this is the deepest the show gets when it starts bringing in like school concepts. Like, oh, what are we gonna see with this? If this teacher's just gonna raise them, it's gonna do that. And that's just my 50 cents. Like, I go even further. Like, this directly translate into real life power structures and what are we gonna do? And it's easy to look at a cartoon. Like, anybody in the cartoon will say that's wrong, but people will hate to say it if they look at it in real life. And I'm like, hey, this is just that. And they're like, no. Like, you're going to use the very same excuse that you would use, that the people in the show would use to say why this system works. This system is, and like it's just so goofy, that idea like, oh, we need people to lose so others can win. And that's like that's the biggest critique. Not everyone we don't need losers for everyone to win. Why is it a problem if everyone wins? People do things without having to look down upon others.
Just thinking about it and trying to extrapolate away from the show, because I don't think the show is built to try to handle these topics in a particularly meaningful way. No. So
it's
I'm
just
not going to put it in the fault.
It's a vehicle for talking about these things.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put it on the show that it's like, wow, you guys left some problematic content in your cartoon. Like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But speaking of that structured idea, when I was thinking more along the lines of like, a lot of these things that is being said is like, oh, these like delinquents and don't judge a book by its cover. Those E-class students could be successful in the same ways that the regular people are. It's just that they need to be given the tools to, or that they just have to overcome even more structures of like oppression and all that to overcome. So it's just like, oh, you're currently in a state that's like not that great, but if you just work harder, and I know this sounds real cheesy, but if you just work harder and just keep at it and maybe have a few breaks here and are really motivated, you too can beat out the losers at the top who take things for granted because they just judge you by how you look. And I'm like, that's kind of a really base way of presenting this sort of hierarchical structure of just like, oh yeah, funny. I said base. Anyway,
I mean, I was trying to cough, but yeah, that is really funny.
Oh, I thought you were laughing. I thought you were laughing. But
good
like,
joke.
But yeah, it just felt so much of like, oh, is this show really trying to do the whole don't judge a book by its cover thing? Not really, because it's not like as if the kids fundamentally change. It's not like their relationship to anyone else fundamentally changes. It's not like the other students gain an appreciation of what Class E can do. You know what I mean? It's just the idea of, oh, these people we labeled as unsuccessful, and shame is used as motivation so that other people, it's like, oh, if I go to Class E, I'm going to be like the people I made fun of, and I don't want to be made fun of by my friends, so I'm going to study real hard. And I'm like, okay, sure, but like, if they just raised themselves up and were treated the same, couldn't you do the same thing and still have like not these artificial barriers of oppression and just have a general, like, if you want to build this competitive atmosphere, I feel like you can build it without the intrinsic need of like this ostracization. And of course, yeah, that's the kind of the point I guess the show is getting, is that this ostracization is bad and, oh, the school is just holding them down because we need to keep the order this way and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, the principal has some nefarious goal or whatever. But it's like, there just seems to be so many inherent like problems and holes in like trying to build that structural ideology. Like, if you're trying to build that ideology into your world building, you have to make it make sense, even if it is nefarious. So currently, even on its own structures, it kind of falls in on itself. And I don't know if that's what the show's trying to say too, that like, oh, this entire structure is inherently flawed, but that's what I think I'm getting at, that like, it's trying to do this whole don't judge a book by its cover, but it doesn't do that either, because the relationships between the different classes doesn't change. The baseball team beats the number one team. It doesn't mean anything. The kids get higher grades in the Big Five. It doesn't, well, at least so far, it doesn't mean anything. If you're really trying to build that whole don't judge a book by its cover, you need to change the relationship and have people go back and look at them and relate to them. The high school kids who think that they're all prissy smartasses and think they're better than them, and then learn that they're not, that they're still the undercurrent, or I guess they kind of do. It doesn't change anything.
Yep. It doesn't have any meaningful repercussions on the world, at least so far.
Right. It's just, that's kind of, I guess, the failure of the world building thematically as well. If you're going to build this hierarchical structure and have these relationships, I would assume that they would change over time, but they really don't. So in my head, even if E-class succeeds, oh well, another class is just going to fall into that space, and they're just gonna be what E-class was. Or if they're not, say E-class, say everyone in E-class becomes what D-class is, and D-class goes to E-class. E-class will probably still just be treated like they're E-class. You know what I mean? I can't see a situation where now all of E-class is like satisfied with just being like, oh, we're in D-class, and then all of D-class goes to E-class, and now korosensei is teaching this other group. It's like, I don't see how that would progress.
Yeah.
That just hits another wall.
Yeah, and then I want to come back to what Texas Ranger pointed out too, which is just like at a kind of like, you know, bare bones like literal level. It's like it takes a super teacher. Like it doesn't take like it takes like a superhuman teacher. Like it takes a teacher who can essentially be like these kids' parent, their like mentor, their like psychologist. You know, it takes a teacher who can be all of these things and their educator. It takes all of that to then be able to like, yeah, go ahead.
Korosensei even says like, oh, as long as they're in my class, I'm responsible for them, not their parents, not their blah blah blah, not XYZ. And I'm just like, that's not
healthy, but that's so real.
Not
like,
healthy.
oh my god, that's literally what happens so many times. And then you see so many teachers like burnt out, and you're like, man, how much did you make for this? $10? Oh my gosh, who's getting paid more? The janitor? Like, we're all getting. I was like, dang. And that's not to knock like janitors. That's not at all what I meant to say. But it's also I just want to talk about teachers are underpaid, y'all. But please respect your teachers. Please respect your teachers.
But Korosensei has to be like their teacher, but then Karasuma has to be team dad, and Miss Yelovich, I don't know if they call her team mom yet, but she also has a function at least. And it's like, okay, so you literally have to build these people an entirely separate structure in order for them to succeed in the way they did. But it's like, that is so unrepentantly just not possible to work, because when these kids leave, they still go home. They still go to their houses. Like, yeah, you can try to be there, but for one person to put this all task on one person, it's like, oh, but the system, just waving your finger at the system is not like good enough. It doesn't work like at all.
Oh boy, there's like two ideas that I have left on the subject. But I think one of them is like a little bit like, yeah, I mean, I think we practically already covered all the points on this, so I think I'm just not gonna mention it. I guess the other thing that I was trying to say is, well, actually, no, you know what? It could be interesting. And I actually don't think the show is going to I don't think the show is going to do this. But this would be, you know what would be an interesting way to end this tale? So have you guys ever heard of the ones who walk away from Omelas? So it's like a short, it's a short story written by Ursula Le Guin. I think that's her name. And it's like basically like, it's very similar to this. This is like utopian society. And like in order for the society to be utopian, there's like one kid who's like basically like the brunt of like everybody's like negative feelings. Like it's like this kid who's like locked away, and like they like beat the shit out of him and like relentlessly abuse like the kid. And it's like eventually like all of like the like people in like Omelas like are like made aware of that, and most of them choose to like continue to live in Omelas because they're like, oh, like I guess this is like I'm gonna live with this trade-off. Like it's like a like utopian society at the expense of one person, and I'm not that one person. I can reconcile that. But like there are some people who like walk away from Omelas because they just can't like they can't reconcile what's going on with like their personal like moral code. And it's like it would be interesting to see if like the show, I don't think it will, like but like as like a first time viewer of the show try to do something like that, like we're just gonna walk away from this structure because we know it's like morally like bankrupt. Yeah, I don't know, it's like it's an interesting thing. Like the thing about Omelas, it's like the same thing that like we see when we, you know, see this show. It's like we see this system and we're like, this is just wrong, this is just not okay, you know, this is just like repulsive to like our sensibilities as human beings. Which is like interesting again because it's like we look at like, you know, our real educational system, and I think it's like you won't get like the vast majority of people probably won't say that like there are things that are fundamentally like it's like the whole thing, like I guess it's like it's not that level of a critique, You know, it's like people, like, depending on who you are, you'll have folks who'll be like, yeah, there's some things that are wrong with it, or you'll have folks who'll be like, I don't know, like, there's like structural problems, like institutional problems, like inequalities built into schools and all this stuff. But like, I think it's pretty rare to come and like run into someone who's like, nope, like the whole thing is like fucked, and like we need to like destroy schools and create new schools with a different model. Maybe like that. I'm sure, you know, Texas Ranger probably knows more about this. I'm sure those people do exist. But like, as in many other like corners of society, when it comes to like folks who are like radicals, it's just usually dismissed as like you know, utopian, like sentimental utopianism, or it's like just like marginalized and like not taken very seriously except in like small pockets, or in theoretical discussions, but not when it actually comes to like practical things such as like policy making. But that's just like, I don't know, man. It's a thing.
I think thematically, that's pretty much all I really got from it. That, like, again, going back to the very central problem, the show just doesn't know what it wants to be. And that problem of not knowing what it wants to be means it either doesn't say anything at all, or it brings up interesting ideas and immediately drops them, or it brings up things that then are turned, and when you look at it, wait, that's pretty nefarious. What are you trying to say here? And because you don't explicitly point it out, it leads me to believe that there's just arbitrary things. And again, we mentioned before, it could be cultural. There could be a lot more cultural things that we're not getting due to the Japanese school system and the way society is built over there. It could just be for comedy's sake, as we said with like the cross-dressing episode, and like, oh, don't smoke because smoking is not cool because, I don't know, I was in Dare as a kid. Sure, I guess. That's like an easy. Korosensei said smoking's not good, so I'm not going to. Okay, that's
the powers that be tell me not to do this, so therefore I shouldn't do this. We were in the same.
The powers that be
class.
that I trust versus the powers of be that I don't trust. You know what I mean?
We were in the same Dare class. LOL.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh no! I just want to end it on one thing. The reason I said, and this is for comedy, another reason I said I would have dropped the show at episode 10, the baseball episode, is because, one, the entire baseball thing was stupid. I don't want to get into it, but they were just like, we're just going to bunt and score and win. And I'm like, that's dumb. You came in with one strategy. The one strategy didn't work. It blew up. But the most thing that pissed me off is just like, and this goes back to my idea that the girls in this show are not treated that well. The girls have a basketball game too. Are we just not going to help them? Korosensei is only going to teach the boys, and then the girls are just over here to dirt, and then they just show up being like, oh, we lost to the girls' basketball team, and yeah, let's see how the boys are doing. And I was just like, oh. Like, I'm not trying to say the show was like disregarded.
We really don't give a fuck about the women in this show.
Yeah, it really doesn't. Like, I struggle to find a single female character in this show that's like treated well, you know?
Yeah, that's real.
What was I gonna say?
And don't get me wrong, shonen has an issue. Most shonen, I would say, in fact, most media has an issue with portraying women and stuff. And I'm not gonna single out the show and be like, man, show has a problematic way to deal with female characters. But it just was so blatantly obvious that it's just like, wow, girls in the show are really just here. And then when they do get their one thing, it's like, oh, they can walk through a club because no one will bother them, yet people bother them anyway, yet Nagisa's here too, and oh, they kicked the dude, and go girls. What? I don't know. That episode was also dumb. We talked about it already. Yeah.
Yeah. What I think last comment on like the school and like the system and all that. Okay, baseball game is actually a good example of this. Like, this shit has some serious psychological repercussions on people, man. Like, Nagisa starts from a point of thinking that his life is worthless and like being willing to like sacrifice his life
to die.
Yeah. Baseball boy, like star pitcher guy's whole sense of self-worth is tied to his like image as like a meritable person, to the point that when it starts crashing down, he has like an identity crisis. This is horrible. This is like...
Or, this could be interesting. It's not.
Yeah. And again, it's like, what does that say about our current like world? It's like, yeah, same shit. It's the same fucking thing, man. Whether you're meritable or unmeritable, this system does violence against you. Quote unquote, like meritable or unmeritable.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think it's kind of moving from that. I think, to end on like, unless folks want to continue going, but I think we've at this point basically exhausted almost everything we could say about the first half of the show. But like, I will say this, like on a positive note, there is like good to extract out of like korosensei. Like there is like good to extract out of his like pedagogy. Like there is like good to extract out of his like philosophy of education.
Mm-hmm.
Like his whole attitude of like I refuse to like see these like remedial students as like anything but like worthy individuals, and like I will do everything in my power to ensure that they can actually live up to their potential even if other people don't believe that they have this potential. Like that is like praiseworthy.
That is.
Like that aspect of like his attitude, like it is praiseworthy. It is a good thing. Like we can like acknowledge the good even when there's like a lot of bad in like the background. Like we can point out like the good like aspects of like the show and like the kind of like philosophical ideas in the show. And like I think on that note, like korosensei is like a bright spot, man. Like korosensei, at least in my opinion, like he's just a character. Like he's clearly like the axis, like the whole show revolves around him. And like it's like, oh god, this, depending on the levels, it's like at the level of like, dude, you're gonna blow up the earth, it's like, oh god, this is terrible. But I'm sure we'll get some explanation around what that actually means. But like at the level of like him as like a teacher, it's like he's a good teacher.
Yeah.
He's a good teacher. And we can point that out. And he's a funny character. He's a likable character. And he seems to by far be the most complex character out of anyone in the cast. And like,
I mean,
yeah,
I was just going to say, my headcanon is that even in the moments where he's like being shameful, or moments where he's like off kilter, or moments where the characters catch him like in ways and he's like, oh my god, freaking out, I still think that's calculated. And I think it goes to show that like that whole thing where you said he's going to do whatever it takes to realize the potential of students, even if it is at the detriment of himself personally. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, I can see that. And it's good. And he's funny. For those English dub watchers, he's the voice of Maze Hughes and Krillin, so that was hilarious also to think of. But yeah, no, korosensei's philosophy of like, you can find a way to succeed and I won't give up on you no matter what you do, because I have the potential, the ability to do this. I will cater myself specifically to you as best I can, and you will succeed, or I myself have failed. Like, it's not on you, it is on me, him, the teacher, korosensei.
Yeah, and it's like, I think there's like a I don't remember the exact quote or like what I wrote down, but there's like a point where it's like, as part of his like educational philosophy too, he's like, I mean, it's an interesting educational philosophy. It's like, I think he says like high walls, so it's like, like goals that seem almost unreachable for students, but that they can reach, and like healthy competition, and like I think also probably collaboration to a certain extent. Like those things, or like what does he say about like I honestly I don't remember what he says about like the meaning of like the value of like education as like a whole, but it's like there's like these little gems of like, let me see if I can actually find it. It's probably in my notes, but this is like these little gems where it's like, oh, this is actually like an interesting view of like what enables like students to succeed in terms of like education, but then also of like, like what the value of like education as a whole is, and so it's like, yeah, that's what it is. It's like, this is what I jotted down. It's like, everyone can grow, but they need high walls and allies. Like that's part of it. And so it's like that kind of stuff is like, it is interesting. Like as far as like ideas go, like it's interesting. It's real interesting. I can't find like the bit about his, I see. Here it is. Experience of competition, sharpening mind, broadening knowledge under a set of like rules is like the real treasure of education. And it's like, yeah, it's like these like general principles that like can be applied to like different contexts, and so I'm like, hey, like yeah, that's a really interesting like educational philosophy. Like I actually think that's like, hey, I don't have a lot to like compare it to, but like intuitively, like it seems to be fairly correct, fairly if not like fairly mostly potentially. I don't want to necessarily say completely, but like it seems to be pretty on the nose. And I will say this too, for a fucking octopus monster, like a yellow octopus monster, he's the most human character in the whole damn show. Like, he is the most human character. We see his strengths. We see, that, I mean, we haven't yet unpacked his, like, his baggage or whatever that is, his, like, deep motivations, but we see his strengths. We see his, like, character quirks. We see his, like, imperfections. He is the most human character in the show. And that's, like, a very interesting, like, ironic thing. That, like, this monster who's, like, supposed to, like, be, like, the bad guy that's, like, gonna, like, destroy the world unless you kill him is the most human figure in the whole show. I don't know if folks have, like, that's kind of my last thoughts on the matter, but I don't know if folks want to jump off of that or, say a couple last words on the subject and then we can close it out. But, yeah, korosensei, man.
Yeah, korosensei is great. He's fun.
So, unless, anybody else has any last things like Silver or Texas Ranger, I'll open that up to y'all real quick.
No, I think we should start wrapping up.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to assume that Texas Ranger feels similarly. So, I think on that note, this was like the first half of Assassination Classroom. Frankly, like, hey, is it a show that I would rewatch? Definitely not the first half. Maybe I'll like the second half more. Do I have some serious like criticisms? I absolutely have some serious criticisms. Like, are there like interesting ideas? Are there things to pull out? Yeah, there are. And so I think we're all kind of like along a spectrum of that, as pertains to like our like views on the show. And, I guess as far as, like, this podcast episode, once again, like, thank you all so much, our, like, lovely listeners for listening to, again, this 2-part series on the first half of Assassination Classroom. We sincerely appreciate it. We appreciate you all. If your boy can actually figure out a way to get this, like, 30 seconds that got, like, hit with like a copyright violation for his like first video on like Bakemonogatari, if I can get that resolved, that will be out very, very shortly. Our YouTube channel is Otakutariat, like for video essays and such. Anime Ramblin Boys also has a YouTube channel. And like we have a Twitter. Please follow us on Twitter at Anime Ramblin Boys and also at Otakutariat. For Otakutariat, we also have a Patreon. So like if you want to support our content and the work that we make, the art that we do, like please like throw your boys a couple of dollars. We would really greatly appreciate that. I think, again, like this wouldn't, like we appreciate you all listening to us. And I think that's about it. So I think on that note, anybody want to send us off?
Have a good night, everyone. You could, I don't know how to end Assassination Classroom Season 1. Like I said, I probably wouldn't watch it if starting over again or anything like that. But maybe Season 2 will change things around. Thanks for all your listenership. We have a YouTube now where we also upload this podcast. That's being built, and that can be a way to point people to the Spotify, to everything else. Also follow us on Twitter at Boiz Anime. We're still posting things over there all the time. And yeah, as Tropical said, we're getting the content to you guys as fast as we can, dealing with the horrible, horrible YouTube system we've heard so much about. Yeah, that, I guess we could say peace, love, swag.
And prosperity. Bye, everybody.
And stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe,
healthy.
y'all.
COVID is still
Lots
a thing.
going on.
Yeah, and with that,
bye-bye.
I will see you all next time. Peace. Next time. Peace. Next time.